Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar. This is Allie Mackey with Waukesha Gas Engines. I'd like to introduce our presenter, Product Training Center Manager Matt Walloch, who's going to present today's topic, ESM2 eHelp Access. Matt's going to go through several topics today, so if you have any questions or need him to pause, please use the questions function in the control panel. If you have any technical issues, don't hesitate to chat or use that questions panel to speak up so we can assist you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Matt.
Excellent. Thank you, Allie. Also want to give a big thank you to everybody that's made some time to join us for this session, as well as any of the previous 3 sessions that we've done. So this is kind of a new one. As we looked at our 4 parts of our eHelp sessions, the first one we kind of did a little teaser. We showed you a little bit about what we do with ESM1, a little bit with ESM2, but this is the one where we're going to go a little bit further into the ESM2 portion of things. Now, for those of you that have been able to join us, or even if you weren't able to join us, the first 2 sessions we had some pre-recorded material that we've put out onto the INNIO YouTube page. So please feel free that, if you only have a couple of minutes to reference some of the pieces, these are kind of those snippets or some of the things that we had that were pre-recorded to say, hey, this is eHelp as a whole. And then the big one that I think hopefully has a lot of use for newer technicians, or as a reference guide for folks that maybe don't work on Waukeshas as often, how to pick out which control system you're working with so that you can get to the right troubleshooting trees. So as we look through today, we've got some topics we're going to cover. We're going to look at how to use the software if you need it. Really, ESM2 is much more focused on using that display, the HMI that's on there, that's a touch screen. So we're going to navigate a little bit differently. But if we do use it, that's really what we're going to use here today, just to kind of filter through it. And we'll go through a little bit more on how to use some of those tools. But I'm going to kind of kick things off similar to what we've done before. We're going to knock out with another poll. We want to know kind of which ESM2 features have you used so far. So there is an eHelp function that is part of this. There's also a way for you to go through the help section and find some of the polls, or find some of the manuals that are in there. So operation and maintenance manuals. Have you used any of the graphing function? It's a pretty important piece. I actually think the graphing is probably a more detailed or an easier way to do some of the troubleshooting. The alarm screen is great for filtering all kinds of information in there. We will use that as a main focus. And some folks just haven't used ESM2 yet and just kind of curious. So we're completely open to seeing who's out there, what are some of the features that you used, and that'll help us, again, make sure that we get all the right information. So just give everybody just another minute or two to go ahead and jump in there. All right, we've got about a minute in here, so I'm going to go ahead and share some of those results with you guys. So it looks like a good portion of folks have used eHelp, so that's a good thing. That's a key to finding out how to do this. I'm really excited to see the exact same percentage on alarms, because you have to use the alarm screen in order to get to eHelp. But the graphing screen, seeing nobody using that one, I think that kind of tips me in for something that I've talked about with some of our folks around here. We think that might be the next thing that we're going to look at, maybe for some future development on how to use that as a troubleshooting guide. Now, today's session is no different than all the rest. We are recording it, so that's why we do have your lines muted. And with that recording, those of you that are able to join us, looks like we got a decent number here ready to join us here, which is great. But those of you that were registering, hoping to watch it another time, again, feel free to do that. If you have a colleague or somebody that you think would benefit from watching some of this information, again, have them register as well. They'll be able to get access to the recording just the same. So with that, I kind of want to go over looking at how you would get software. Now, if we look at the HMI that we have here, I can pretty much do 95% of the things that I want to do. There's just a couple of things that I have to use a laptop for. So what I've done is I'm actually using the software, but I'm using the software out of convenience, because I need to be able to share my screen with you so you can see what we're doing. Now, some of those other features, such as downloading reports or looking at adding some users in, that requires you to use the software. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and show you my screen here. And I've actually got a link here for where that download is. Now, the reason I'm sharing that right now as I go ahead and show you my screen, if you want to go ahead and write that down, feel free to do so, or do a screen capture if you need to in order to grab this content. The reason I do this is because some of our previous manuals were before we were part of INNIO or part of just Waukesha gas engines. It was when we were GE. So some of those references that are in your manuals will still show a GE web access in order to find where the software is. We currently host this on our MyPlant site. So as you read here, it says myplant.io. So that's our interface website, but this does not require a sign-in. So if we looked at where we compare to ESM1, where ESP you had to have access to either a disk from the purchase of the equipment or going to our customer portal in order to access some of that information, this we wanted it to be a little bit more readily available. So this is on a public access site. Now, I kind of like this software a little bit different in terms of this versus ESP. And the reason I like it, not just because it's a little bit more publicly available, but whenever we came out with a new version of ESP, it was really kind of on you to watch when we're coming out with announcements to say, hey, there's a new software piece for you to go and look at. Well, with ESP, that was the way it was done, and it was kind of on the technician to make sure that they got the latest updates. With the Diane software or the XT4 software, it actually, every time you log in, is more web-based. So it says, hey, there's a new version out there. Do you want to use it? Now, of course, we all have our IT security departments that we have to work through, but just kind of stay in touch and keep looking for updated materials here, or make sure that you have some web access occasionally in order to make sure that it's getting you the latest and greatest. Now, I've already got everything downloaded to my device. I just wanted to make sure that I shared that information with everyone here. So now I'm going to kind of pop right into our software here. So as I look across the top, you just have our Diane XT4, and it gives me which version of the software I'm looking at. It doesn't tell me anything about my engine up here the way that it did with ESP. That's now down at the bottom. So over here it says that this is a W or Waukesha L, which stands for 12-cylinder, 7044, roughly 7,040 cubic inches, GSI in this state. So that kind of tells me which engine I'm working on as opposed to that being up in the top information. The other piece that I want to let you know is you're going to see some of these numbers dancing around here. You know, we've got a different speed up in the top of the right and a little bit of load information there. As we kind of navigate through here, you're going to see these numbers dancing around. When we looked at how the training tool was used with ESP, people said, well, there's never any like real data in there. So how do I know that this is good? Or what would a graph look like because now we have that functionality here with ESM2, or a fault screen, or any of the rest of the information here. So we chose to put together a simulator, and what we're watching right now is actually a recording of the lab engines. So one of the ones that was, pre-production as we were developing the engine. We went and we made some recordings, and we chose some different things like fuel system setups, high load, low loads, setting up some different faults, so that the person, as they learn how to use it, doesn't have to take chances by going up to a running engine. You can have this separate device that uses a real HMI and uses real recorded data. And currently we have a 7044 GSI like we're watching right now, so a 12-cylinder VHP, a 16-cylinder VHP P9394 GSI S5, as well as a 275 that are all loaded onto the same device. So if you've never seen a 275 on ESM2, you can go ahead and train on this same device. So that is a piece of hardware that you can purchase, or we do have some of those available through our services team that they can try and work with you on it. Of course, if you came for a class, we would use those regularly in our ESM, VHP, VGF, and 275 classes currently. So as we take a look at this, I'm going to look for a fault again. Same as what we did on our first main screen when we were in ESP. I'm looking to see if I have an alarm or a fault that's active. Now a little bit different, but similar location. I'm going to go to the top right again. And over here, I've got this green circle. As I look at that green circle, everything is good. In the main top bar here, it says right now, I'm in a run position and the engine is running. So that's great. I don't have any faults that are active. If I did have a fault, right here where we have with the green circle here, we would see this turn to yellow. And in case somebody might be colorblind, they also go and put a little triangle in here or try to get your attention a little bit more. If you have a yellow one, that means that there is currently an alarm. If it is red and the circle goes red and the triangle is red, then you do find that it is a shutdown code. Well, bigger than that, in the center here, it also describes. So it'll give me a readout of the comment of what is actually going on with the engine at that particular time. As we go through this, you're going to see this is changing because, again, I'm running a script or a recording that runs about 15, 20 minutes. So as we go through this, you'll probably watch this one start pre-lube and do a couple of things a few times within our session here today. Now, the next piece that I want to look at is really kind of understanding where would I look for my alarms beyond that. This tells me how I'm working, but down at the bottom right here, I've got my alarm screen. As I go and I hit that one, I should see nothing right now because up in the top, I have no yellow indicator and I have no message at the top telling me that there's an alarm. As I come down a couple of rows here, you're going to see I've got the red triangles and the yellow triangles. So these are my shutdowns as well as my alarms, and these are only showing things that are active. So the same as with ESP, we had our active, but then we also could show our fault history. Well, going up one row here, we see where we've got this little clock that's located there. And this goes ahead and moves back in time. And it says in the last day, here's all of my alarms. And we'll just scroll through and I'm going to tell you, they're all going to be the same because I've been running the same recording for the last couple of days here, trying to get prepared for our meeting. Now, the big thing that I look at is it defaults to a day. So it gives my current date and time here. Again, in the format right now, it's giving day, month, year. But in my user settings, I could change that to be month, day, year, or if I wanted a 24-hour clock. Those are all things you can adjust if you want to. In this case, I'm going to say, okay, for the last day, this is how long it's been. Well, what if I say, you know what? I haven't been here in a month. So let's see what else we can do. I'm going to go and pull the last 30 days worth of information. So it takes my date frame here from August 17th and moves it back to July 18th. And it says, I've got all of these faults that may have been active for me to try and dig in a little bit further. Now, if I go through here a little bit further, this is just my alarms and shutdowns. What if I want to find out what caused that alarm? I can click on this and I can jump into my eHelp and be just fine. But what if I wanted to find out a little bit more? If I say, hey, I've got this oil pressure filter fault, well, what led up to that? Maybe we had some non-factory filters or something that was dirty within the system and is causing some problems for us. We can find out that information as well. So if I come across here, before I hit the clock, that was it. I just had these 4 icons here. Now that I've hit the clock to go back in time, I can also find out a little bit more information. And I'm going to hit the hand right here, and this gives me basically everything. So as I look here, it says, you know, here I opened it. Here's where my fault occurred. And it also shows some of the different users or different pieces that are in here. Now, if I wanted to take a look at this, what do you guys think? What would be one use that you could see for looking at not just the when did a fault occur, but what were some of the things that led up to it? Some of these may be, again, you know, figuring out when did somebody make a change. You could find out also when somebody logged in. Well, that's a bigger piece. We're going to get into that in just a minute here. Oh, looks like a good number already replying. Good on that one. looking at some great numbers here. I think there's some important pieces that we're going to have come out of this one. All right, we've got that one just at about, well, a good portion of our folks that have already joined. Let's go ahead and share that one for your results. So most people said identify when a control setting change was made. Absolutely. And as we'll look at our screen here in just a minute, you'll see I actually put in some changes and saw kind of what those were. What you didn't see yet is there are multiple users that are available. There is a default user or a customer that comes in as what we adjust to. But we also allow you to put in multiple users. You could put it down to the service provider or the individual operator. You can look at, where your connection faults were, or dive in a little bit further into just a functional fault. That's a good one. And you can also look at when people logged in. So all of these are completely valid. And again, the not sures are totally fine too, because you may not know that it has all of that functionality. So as I look here, I also have a search function that is new. Now, some of you have versions of the Diane XT4 software or the client material, and they're capable of looking at newer and older versions. But really, we're talking about what is on that HMI or the actual calibration that's loaded in there. So some of you may have this functionality with the search function, some of you may not. And I'll show you in a little bit how to find out which versions have this functionality versus some of the previous ones that may not. I thought this was pretty doggone cool. Because as I scroll down here, I could keep going for days and days and days to go through my 30 days worth of information. But I don't want to do that. I want to say, if I got this fault here and I hit the hand, what are 5 things that happened here? Well, I'm going to go and I'm going to focus right down here, and I'm going to see I've got all these WKI changes. Well, what if I say, you know what, I'm not even going to look at my days here. I'm just going to put in the window. How many WKI changes have I seen in that window? And it immediately jumps and gives me that in the last 30 days, this is what happened. Now, this is where it kind of drives a little bit further, or kind of that next level piece of material. It says, this is the time that this exactly happened. It shows that the value was changed. In this instance, instead of it saying customer and customer, there's a different login here. It shows that it is a service provider, or the title that I've given to it, and they are in the customer role, or the ability for them to make changes to the control system. They went to parameter 6, which is our WKI adjustment, and they adjusted from 90 to 93. Everything looks good there. But then we see the classic case here. If I look here, it says it's at 818, and person by the name of second shift, because second shift's always the one that seems to be the one that gets the blame, whether they did something wrong or not. I decided I'd have a little fun here and just listed this particular user as second shift. And they came in here and they said, well, it was at 90, but the engine doesn't seem like it's running right, so I'm just going to go to 130. Not understanding how dramatic that is to the engine. Warning that comes up and says, hey, are you sure you want to do this? If you don't know that can adjust your timing for a running engine, it can also cause for a shutdown and occur. We really don't encourage people to make running WKI changes while the engine is running in order to kind of find out that they're going to cause all kinds of problems. Well, maybe they just got it wrong and they said, well, maybe it wasn't 130, or maybe they missed a digit and accidentally typed it in. So they quickly go and adjust it back to 30. Well, that doesn't sound like a good idea. Well, then they're going to start doing some swinging around here, and they're going to say, well, I think it's close to 65, but I'm not sure, so I'll just keep playing a little here, a little there. That's not a recommended method as well. So just kind of understand, we really still want you to get a very valid fuel sample in order to properly set the control system. Again, there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes for how do we adjust actuators, as well as timing curves, and our fuel system based on what fuel you're telling us to run. So again, fuel samples are really important pieces for us to use. Now I'm going to go back here and I'm going to get rid of my WKI information. And I'm going to just, again, kind of search by again, what maybe that user was. So I will go in and put in service provider. And it's going to show when they logged in. So if I'm not sure who's using the equipment, again, this reinforces why we want to see multiple users. It shows that not only did this person log in, it showed what change they made, and it also shows another piece here that they used the message board. Now, this is another feature within our help function that if you want to attach, say, a photo or information for when you changed a setting, or why you changed it, or add a fuel sample and attach that. That is something that with the laptop functionality, you can add messages, and you can also make that available to either to people who are logged in or to anybody that accesses that engine. So that's another pretty powerful tool to be able to use. Now, as I step forward a little bit from there, I'm going to clear this out again because I want to start doing a little bit of eHelp. As I look at my fault here, again, it gives me my time and date stamp. It also tells me which particular fault it was. Now with ESP, it just said, hey, I've got this code, go and dig into eHelp. Well, this one, instead of just looking at flashy blinky lights, it says this is a high oil pressure differential that we are having to troubleshoot. And this is a functional fault. So saying that it's outside of its range or that we're beyond where we want it to be to say that the engine is running correctly. I then go back over here, over to my top right, and I hit where I've got my little PDF and the question mark. So that is our eHelp icon that we're going to open up. As I look here, it then says, okay, which engine am I working on? So we would have our 6-cylinder VHPs, our 12-cylinder VHPs, our 16-cylinder VHPs, and currently we would also see our 275 product line listed for those particular sensor faults. Now again, the faults that you get are going to be dependent on which sensors are actually on that engine. So it won't tell me how to troubleshoot, say, a crankcase pressure sensor on a 275 because it right now doesn't have one, but it would give me that access for a VHP. So we know we've got our L7044, so I'm going to go ahead and jump on my 12-cylinder here. This is really kind of where ESP falls behind ESM2 here. We said, okay, here's my fault. Well, this is our description. That part's the same. Now it's going to start identifying where those locations might be. And as I scroll through, it gives me some of my sensor locations. It also says, for the rail on the side, where does that sensor actually plug in? We go a little bit further, and then we see where our ECU connection is. And it identifies that on the side of the ECU, we've got our harness connections. So this is going to be A, B, and C, and D harness. And it is identifying that this would all go through the C harness. It lists where my pre-filter pressure is for looking at it, and then it also looks at where my location for where that plugs into the rail. It says, okay, now just having a setting that's too high, the troubleshooting on this is we may have filters that are clogged. It's an indicator that, hey, it's time to get those changed. But it might also be something else related to a sensor that may be failing or a connection that may be loose. So we see that there are a couple of associated faults. If I had looked in my fault screen over here and I saw 2015, but I also saw a 1006 or a 1007 that had been coming and going, maybe I would start digging in a little bit further into those. It says if filters are good, now look at our calibration settings to make sure that they are the proper ones for that particular engine, that we haven't loaded, say, a 6-cylinder with high horsepower versus a low horsepower or a different fuel system. Make sure that it is correct, and then verify that your pressure is good with a gauge as opposed to a sensor that may see that maybe there's something just not quite right with that sensor. Always verify your oil level and then get into your other codes. Well, let's say I do have one of those other codes. Instead of having to go all the way back out and come back in, I can just come up to the top here where our binoculars are, and I'm just going to list 1006 here. Now it says that is my oil pressure for post filter. I'm going to select my same engine, and it says that there is a problem now. So instead of it being a functional fault, we've changed over to where there may be a signal fault or something physically wrong with the connection or the sensor itself. It says one of the common pieces could be due to a plugged sensor or something going on with the connection with it. It is a little different in the troubleshooting here because now I'm looking at the actual component. So this looks pretty similar to one of the references we would have seen in ESP, where it says, okay, here is my information on it being a 5-volt signal. We've got our ground connection, and then we've got our feedback loop, or the signal that comes back to give us our reading and voltage for this particular sensor. It then goes in and it says, okay, here are my harnesses, and it's going to show each connector if we were going from the right bank and then coming over. And we see how this comes, and we've got our 1, 2, and 3 connections, and then we see where A, B, and C are located. And it describes what the wire numbers are and what their function is. So you've got the on the wire identifier, as well as the number identifier, and then the pin connection there. Again, we go back to where our connection would be on the rail, as well as then where it connects up to our ECU. There may have been a 3006 associated code. That's actually related to if that sensor were to lose signal, a shutdown can occur as opposed to just an alarm function. That is in our customer user settings, so that is another piece of functionality added for ESM2. And again, we may dig through a little bit further to do some continuity tests as well. Now, if I look into this harness, you'll remember what we were talking about with ESP in the past, and it would identify that, hey, I've got signal A in capital, small v, and then capital K. Now, I will tell you that my eyes aren't getting any better, and I don't think anybody else's are. So to read some of these smaller letters and numbers, it could certainly be a challenge. So we do have the functionality to go and zoom in on the function. So if I want to zoom right in on just this connector, it will zoom in. Now, I'll tell you, it's not always 100% perfect, because as I zoom in, it's trying to zoom in to the whole 1006 function. Did I lose the ability to kind of scroll back down here and find where my connection is? No. But I will tell you that that is one comment that we've gotten based on the file or the type of file that we have there. That's where we can run into some problems where it looks a little weird and you have to scroll a little bit to find it. But understand that it's zooming in on the complete document as opposed to just the particular page that you are on, because in my instance now, I'm going to end up zooming way in so that I can find that capital A, and then I find my small v looking right in here. And then what was the other one? We had a capital K down at the bottom here. So if I need to look, I get my A, my V, and my K in order to find out where that is. That's an important piece. If I've got one pin that's damaged, we were talking about that before. Somebody doesn't understand, some of the pin sizes are different based on the amperage that they're trying to carry, or one gets pushed out and not making the right connection. You can try and figure out which one out of these could be causing you a problem with it. Now, I also have a search function that's in here. So if I was trying to find, say, 5-volt information, I could zoom in and I'll just kind of come back out here. And every one of the references that has 5 volts in it, then I would go and zoom to those particular pieces. I'll grab the first one and then keep scrolling through that document for all of the references to it. Now, these functions are also in when we go to look at manuals or some of the documentation. So that's a piece that will be shared functionality between the manuals or the references, as well as in eHelp. So now we get to the big question, the one everybody likes answering so much. Who's joining us today? We've had a lot of really good interaction within these sessions. Again, most folks are watching on their own, and that is completely wonderful. Again, we are about halfway through our session right now. And this is the fourth of our eHelp sessions. So again, thank you so much to those of you that have been able to join all four, whether that's in person or via recording. We always appreciate you making some time to learn a little bit more from us. We'll just give everybody another few seconds and give myself a chance to get a little sip of water here.
Hey, Matt, do you have time for a quick question?
Sure.
Question coming in from the question panel here, and if there's more, send them in and we'll get to them. Question is, how do you set up users?
Ooh, that's a good one. So users, I like when I get that question in, because to me that's I think one of the more important pieces. So I'll stop sharing my screen here for a minute so I can come right at you. When you have the access code, so we issue an access code one time, and it lists it as just customer. That is a 6-digit code that honestly we would love for people to protect at a much higher level than what we have seen so far. When you hand out that code or you write it on the front of the panel, you now lose some of that traceability to find out who's using the system or who's making changes. With the software, so this is one of those 5% of things you can do more with a laptop. You get that Diane XT4 software, and then I'm going to just jump in here just to answer this question. We'll get back to our eHelp materials here. And again, just for a second here, we can see we've got good numbers of people. Again, really appreciate that. I'm going to go and share my monitor here. And what I go to is the System tab. Now, I want to go into this System tab, number one, because this is the old information that we would have referenced whenever you contacted us. And it gives us our HMI information as well as our control software. But what I want to do is log in, and I will use my particular code to log in. Don't worry too much about what I'm doing right now. This is part of what I've been doing. So under the System tab, once you are logged in, you come down to the bottom here and you click on Users. Now the default one is the one that's here. I can't delete that. I can't do anything with it, but that is the hard-coded one there. If I had my wish, the owner of the equipment would take this code and take it away from basically everybody else that's going to touch the equipment, because this is the master code. All of these other ones, whether it's second shift or service provider, I can add or remove because I'm essentially the customer. I'm the one that's in charge of the material. Or I can also run into hey, wait a minute, we completely forgot what our passcode was. You can go in here and make a change. Or we had, one of our former employees that's trying to get in and get access, and they want to have it look like their service provider instead of second shift because they know the code. You can go in and change the code. Again, it's a 6-digit code, so we always really want people to make sure they try to get a number that they can remember. Big benefit for this one on service provider. We issue a 6-digit code for each one of the HMIs. So from position 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, on through however many engines you're going to interface with that day with ESM2, you have to write down each one of those 6-digit codes and learn it. What if you had just one code across the entire fleet of ESM2 engines that was really for your company? Make it a lot easier to go through those 6, 10, 12 engines and go ahead and do all of the work that you need to do, and it logs you as service provider. Same thing for your operators that are on site. We find that more often people don't really need these access codes because really it's only people actively making changes. So really all of the things that we're going to show for troubleshooting with eHelp, you don't need an access code for. It's only for people that really need to make changes to the engine. So a really long answer again, Allie. Sorry if that's all that you wanted was the 3 clicks to go to login, system, users, add or subtract. And then as I go down to my users here, you can see all of those are now loaded up there. So I would want to log in as service provider or second shift. Allie, you got another one out there?
That's it.
Okay. Again, this is something that's near and dear to me. I like playing around with ESM2 because almost anything that we've thought of so far or heard from classes or feedback has been pretty positive. And when somebody asks us, does it do this? Most of the time we can say, yeah, it does. And if it doesn't, we'll get it loaded up with our controls folks and get them ready to put it together. Well, now that we've done our poll, we know how many people have joined us. I want to go back into something here that we talked about before. What we talked about with ESP is going into your hard drive, go on to your C drive, go find your program files, then go find your ESM folder, then go find documentation. And it was all kind of buried in there. And I'm going to show you how to get to the manual within ESM2. I'm going to come down to the bottom here. Now, right next to where I was in user, I've got help. And as I click on help, it says either the user manual or the message board. As I click on the user manual, it's going to take a second because it's going to go and open up the PDF for the manual, but it's already loaded. Now, as I take a look at this one, it says I've got a VHP Series 4 12-cylinder engine with ESM2. I didn't pick that. How did it know that I wanted the Series 4 ESM2 manual? Well, it looked at the configuration. Again, when we started, we said we had an L7044 GSI. So I don't have to figure out, well, which engine am I working on? It's got them loaded in the background. And if we wanted to, again, logged in people, you can go into the files function and also find where the manuals are located. But we didn't want people to have to search around too much for the manual. So we said right under here for help, hit that. And then you go in here and let's say we're looking for HMI information. I go and I search that, and it's going to go and find all of my references. Again, similar to how you would go through any search function within a PDF viewer these days. Just so much more convenient than having to scroll through the whole book to find some information. So that was another high piece for you to make sure I covered, was looking at the manuals. I like kind of where everybody went with the users as well, so that's a good one. Well, now it's story time. We did a couple of scenarios that we wanted to run through in our last session for ESM1. Now I want to do one for ESM2. I was invited to come out to a site to join a new installation of some ESM2 engines. And the customer had some of company X and some of company Y. And they had some ESM1 stuff and they had some new ESM2 engines. And really, they didn't know how to interface with them or how to use what we've got here. And when they did that, they went and they said, okay, we had a fault. And they said, okay, well, you go into the alarm screen and you read off what the fault is. And I said, yeah, no, we called somebody out because we didn't know what to do with it. And they were here for, a few minutes and they said, yep, got it all fixed and working. And a few days later, they get their service report and they don't really understand what it says that the person did. So I'm now the factory guy. So they're trying to figure out, and I'm showing them how to navigate all the way through ESM2. I've got the simulator out. I've got them clicking through things and they're just stuck on, well, what did that guy do? How could he get in and out of here in just a couple of minutes? So I said, all right, let's go and look at that alarm screen. How long ago were they there? And they're like, oh, about 2 weeks ago. And I said, well, let's look at it. And all of a sudden I get through the fault screens and I said, well, I know what they did. And they said, well, what did they do? I said, well, they just disconnected all the harnesses and they put them back together. And they're like, well, what in his report told you that? All right, now for a little fun. How do you guys think I figured this one out? I got to hope for at least one magic 8-ball person. That's all I'm hoping for out of the session. All right. Well, I appreciate the person who did put in a magic 8 ball. That was my entertainment. So we always have to have a little bit of fun when we're trying to do one of these. Well, all too common, people go to YouTube and try and figure out how to troubleshoot stuff. Well, our YouTube content really doesn't go there. You may find some people who are early adopters or early users trying to teach you how to use ESM2. That's not how I did it. I used the eHelp functionality. That should have been the giveaway because it's an eHelp situation. But how did I figure out that the person just disconnected the harnesses and reconnected them? Well, our harnesses actually have a can function. So within the can function, it actually has a specific piece that shows you can harness fault, harness A, harness B, harness C, harness D. And I could tell that that happened because I could see that they went and just pulled it off and pulled it back on because it said harness A, harness B, harness C, harness D very, very quickly within just seconds of each other. And the person was able to get the engine to run again, but did they really troubleshoot it? Now, the harnesses for ESM2 are a little different. We aren't just going to see some faults where it says, hey, I've got an alarm, I've got no communication. But we have expected amount of resistance or a full can loop within the harness. So that is an important piece. Now, here's my cautionary tale. So again, we found out that that's just what the person did. We won't name names of customer versus service provider, but I can tell you they were a little frustrated that the person had done that. And the important thing, the thing that's really kind of dangerous around that one, is that they did it with the power on because I could see all of those faults turning on and off. So if you did have a potential risk for any connections, that would have been a bit of a risky situation to take on or damage to a harness. But you never want to take a chance with control circuits to do any of that connecting or disconnecting while the system is live. So a bit of a risky procedure on that one. So that was an important piece. Now, here's my next big tip for you. Some of the engines that we manufacture on the VHP line come with a catalyst from us. So it is different option codes and it is going to be incorporated into the control system. Some of them people choose to have a catalyst from somewhere else, or they're not required to use one for their particular location. In order to open up that portal to look for the catalyst, there's actually a plug or a little cap that's located on the side of the engine. If I'm looking at our most common engine, the VHP 12-cylinder, it's going to be close to the right front of the engine or just behind where those oil filters are going to be located. There's a little connector that's on there. We have seen where people end up taking that off and they basically throw that connector out and then hook up the catalyst and away they go. Well, for whatever reason, maybe somebody gets a damaged harness or whatever happens from a servicing perspective, at some point they need to go and take that off, and now they need that cap back because inside the cap there's actually a resistor that's in there that will tell it, hey, we're not using the Waukesha supplied catalyst. So if you do have the catalyst, make sure you save that cap. Otherwise, if you need to do some service work or need to disconnect that harness for any reason, you can run into a can fault that's in there. Now, I wanted to go through this a little bit more in detail before. I'm going to go and show my screen again. And there we go. Again, I wanted to reference within our system tab here. I'm going to switch my user back over to just my panel view. And I'm going to go to here and then here back. Now, the reason I did that was, again, to reinforce something that I had shown earlier. When we look at the information that we can get, people are sending it back here and they say, hey, here's my information from eHelp. But they don't necessarily give us this information. What engine am I working on, or what's the CPU information? That can help us with some of the updates of hardware. Some of the serial number information is also important. The software that we're running is really important. Now, I told you there was a little of a reference. Some of those search functions were not added until after version 9A. So 9A was one that was really good. So we have a 3, a 5, a 7, a 9. But this added functionality came in really with the 275 product. So you'll see this on newer setups. You'll see some of the older ones, you may not have that search function, but you have still all the eHelp access information. We've had ECUs sent back here, and we're like, okay, well, what was the hours or what was the information? Well, that'll be stored on the ECU, and maybe we can figure out the fault from there. But we've also had people send back a PDB or something that doesn't have which engine it's associated with come back here, and we really need some of this information. So remember, if you're sending any components back, make sure that you reference some of this information from the Systems tab, because it is a necessary piece for us to really help you guide through the rest of it. As I go back to my alarm screen, I wanted to look at one other feature that you may not see if you're looking at the HMI. So we said that one of the benefits of using the laptop was that you could also go in and add users, but then we can also do downloads. So right from here, this is my Excel, or what it looks like, a little icon for that. And this will now take my information, so in this case, my last day of information, and it'll go ahead and give me that Excel file based on this information. So this really tells me I want to filter down to the information here. So let's go back here and let's go put in second shift. And I want to show that, hey, second shift was in here making all of these changes to the control, and that's what I had to fix. Now I want to go back here one more time, and I'm going to go back to where I had my service provider come in here. And if you remember, I said they changed it from 90 to 93 on the WKI, and then they put in something on the message board. All right, let's see what that looks like. On the message board, let me go and switch my user here. In the message board, it says that I changed the WKI as a service provider to 93 based on a fuel sample. Now, when I put in one of these messages, I can also attach a document or a picture. So this is a little added feature here with the message board that we weren't necessarily planning on, but I wanted to make sure that I also showed that, hey, this service technician showed they changed the WKI, but then they also put in a note as to why they changed it and when they changed it. Now, I want to go to a little bit of a different spot now. Now, when we look at fault codes, there's a lot of work that goes into making sure that those pieces are correct and that they're done right. But occasionally there's a bit of a mix-up. Now, if you had watched us during our third session, I referenced a code 333, which was related to an auxiliary cooling circuit. Now, my point of going through that one was actually to show you that this is how you troubleshoot. But in the background, I also knew that code 333 is actually flawed in ESM2 or in the ESP software. It actually is related to the jacket water cooling system. So we try, but we're still human and we make some errors with some of that. So hopefully it was a good navigation, but I hope nobody goes out there and tries to troubleshoot code 333 and goes down the rabbit hole looking for an auxiliary cooling sensor. You won't find one. Follow the rest of the circuit information and you'll do just fine. Well, guess what? That happened again. We ended up where in ESM2, we had a very specific setup with our 93, 94 engines that came out and they had a couple of mistakes. It said if you get this fault here, so diagnostic code 1052 for pre-turbine exhaust temperature left bank, or for the right bank, it was displaying it as 3036 and 3037. So you would get this fault code that would come up as 3036, and there was no troubleshooting associated with it because really it was meant to be 1052. Now later calibrations have been updated, so this really only applies to this calibration. So that's one of the reasons we want you to know where to find that in the System tab. But if you were to get this and you had the old calibration or the previous calibration, and you end up with this code 3036, go to the troubleshooting tree. Remember, you can put that code right in the top there for 1052 or vice versa for 1053. So we do make changes. Always pay attention to referencing your bulletins. That is an important piece for everybody to make sure that they know how to work through. Now I've got one more reference that I want to go to. As we come back in here, I'm looking at one of my graphing screens. So as I come through and navigate, I hit the green tab for graphing, and I'm looking at my ignition, or I could look at my engine overview information, wherever it may be. Again, I've got all the information here for coolant, oil, percentages, loads, all the rest of the information there. Well, this is supposed to be an eHelp piece. And what I've seen is people will read that alarm screen and understand when the fault happened, but not necessarily know how that happened within the engine or what led up to it. Well, if you remember how we identify faults and shutdowns, one of those pieces is to look for the triangle. Well, down at the bottom here, if I click on this, it says show incidents. If I choose this one, it zooms into a 5-minute window right around when that last fault occurred. So if I was looking here and I had, hey, second shift did this, and then the engine shut down, I can come in here and line up right when that incident occurred, and now maybe move over to my alarm screen, hit that hand, and zoom in a little bit further. So it's an important piece, one that I think has some pretty awesome functionality. And this being the last of our 4-part series, it kind of gets me into our last poll. I can't ask you if you're going to join for the next session because we don't have a planned session. This was our plan for this year, was to do uncovering some of the mysteries around how to use ESM1 and ESM2 eHelp. Because ESM2 is the newest platform, we see most folks wanting to learn a little bit more about this. So we want to find out, is graphing something you'd like to learn a little bit more for how it can help you troubleshoot the engines, how you can make them run a little bit better, how to filter some of the information that's in there or highlight it a little bit better? Well, I'm shutting that one down a little early because I don't think that there's any particular surprise that pretty much everybody would like to learn a little bit more on ESM2, and we certainly understand since this is a little bit newer platform for everybody to work with. As I go in through here, Allie, I'm going to see if you've got any questions that came in before I stop sharing my screen here so that I can navigate as necessary.
Yep, question and maybe you want to do this, Matt, just put the URL into the box, and then we can also include it in the email out to everybody. Yep, the Diana email, perfect, great.
And then add that to
and then
the
another
chat.
Question here, could you please share the name or the number of the bulletin where the code 3036 issue is addressed?
Certainly. So if I come over to my bulletin that I closed, this is bulletin 17 because again, we do chapters for our bulletins. So 17 related to controls. And then this number here, 4051, that is a sequential number. So if you see something that is, say, a 2000, the first one of that would have been much older. So this is pretty doggone current, being one that just came out in July. So this one is bulletin 17-4154. If you do need to take a look at this one, you would use that same customer portal that you could go and access there. So I have added the link for the software into the chat function, so we got that one. Allie, you got something else for me?
That is it for the questions.
I got one more pitch for you. As we got folks going and trying to use the engines for the first time, we found that that simulator was a pretty important piece for them to be able to use. So I want to pitch, hey, it's pretty doggone cool that if you're going to go and get a few more upgrades or a few engines put onto your ESM2 platform, consider looking at your users. You don't want to have that instance where your second shifters are sitting there going, I don't know, let's just keep playing around with it and see if we can get the engine to run right. it'd be much easier for you to go ahead and get something that they could go and learn on a little bit. So I've added into the chat function the part number for the simulator. Again, these are pieces that can be updated and upgraded. So as we continue to add more ESM2 product or make changes to the HMI information, we can also update these simulators. We're actually going to be launching a video to show you how to use an ESM2 simulator within the coming weeks here. So I always like to share that because everything I did today, I did on a simulator, but I was using real data from a real engine in order to do that. You know, I could also go ahead and pop in here and switch over to a 275 and my screen's completely changed. Down on the bottom now I've got a 16V 275, and it was just that quick that I switched from one to the other. So understand that I think training is a really important piece as the training manager, because I want people to have success. I want them to interface with our engines and have a good experience. Let's find out how they all work, and I'll bet you'll be pretty doggone confident in how they go together. So again, part number shared there, software shared there. Thank you to everyone again that made some time. I want to specifically call out Allie for doing some promotion for this series, Becky for putting together the materials as well as the videos, and John for being our controls assist, who's basically the architect of the eHelp system in order for us to have a successful group of webinars here, and look forward to talking with everybody very soon in order to share some more material with you. Thanks again.